Good morning. I see it's already a few minutes past 10 past that we usually start. This is Francois Miller speaking. I would just like to know if anyone is listening, you can just open your mic, please, and just say hi. Then at least I know I'm not talking to the walls that I see, that there are, in fact, someone participating as well. You're welcome to just to say hi. I see that ASM is online at least, and H Technologies, I don't know who that is, but that's the name that is presented here, Internet 5 as well, and Robert as well. I would like to say just good morning to you. But as always, you are welcome to, I've seen Arnold has joined. Say good morning to all of you. So today we are looking at study unit 2 of Church and Dogma History 312 KDGE, and we will be looking at the reformational work of Ulrich Zwingli, and we will also be looking at the Anabaptists, who in a sense started in reaction to Zwingli, because they did not think that he was performing his reformational work soon enough. But I don't think it is valid if you would only understand the Anabaptists as in opposition to Zwingli, but I think it's meaningful to treat these two together. So today we will be looking at questions of the students, and as always, to my mind, that's more or less most important. We will be looking at the background of Zwingli. I think it is important to understand his background, especially if you have to evaluate his contribution in the end, and it helps to understand his difference, for instance, with Luther. And which you should always keep in mind that when looking at Zwingli, his activities were in Switzerland, as Calvin's was as well. But Zwingli died before Calvin even were converted, if you want to put it that way. So although they worked in the same area, they're different somewhat in eras. Some of the main events in Zwingli's life, his theology, something of a comparison with Luther, which we have covered in the previous sessions, looking at the Anabaptists, some of the main exponents, their theology, and then something of a evaluation. And also some general matters concerning the first assignment. And perhaps I can just start with that before we get to the questions or the content of the for today's study unit. There was a question last week on the number of words or the word count for the assignment. And at first my thought was not to give a very specific word count for the assignment, but to leave it more open with the understanding that the words would not be as much counted, but rather weighed. Some people can use a lot of words and say nothing, and some people can say a lot with a few words. And especially because the assignment also gives you the opportunity to use something of a scheme or schematic representation. Then it becomes very difficult to count the words or to give meaning on how much words that you use. I think the best way to address this assignment would be you can write a general introduction in which you discuss the matters on which you want to compare you want to do the comparison. And in that sense, in that section, you can include your bibliographical information, your sources, reference to your sources. And it is also important to, in the end, provide a bibliography of where you got your information from. And after giving an introduction, then you can, in a really cryptic way, just highlight the most important similarities and distinctions, or similarities and differences for the comparison that you have to do. The assignment itself is in the study guide. I've also put it on the Ifundi. I don't want to say the command. Afrikaans I would have said the opdrag. The instructions for the assignment, and which elements you have to look at, which parties you could say you have to look at on justification and how they would differ. And then you can just submit it via Ifundi as well. Previously I've spoken about the due dates. Take note that the due dates I've given you on the schedule, perhaps you will see that the due dates on Ifundi seems as if it is 1 day later. But the only way for me to give you until 12 o'clock in the evening was to set it on Ifundi for, in a sense, 1 minute after 12 o'clock. So you won't have any time actually on the day that is scheduled on Ifundi, meaning it should actually be the previous day as on the schedule. If anyone has any questions still concerning the first assignment, you are welcome to send me an email. Please do it via Ifundi as well. It's easier for me to keep record then. I have asked for, let me just check if any other has since arrived. You want to I've asked that you can, or told you that you can send me your planning scheme for the assignment. I haven't received any yet, but that was not compulsory. That was just to see that you are on the right track, and that so that you don't get a nasty surprise when I have to evaluate your contribution. Secondly, in the study guide, there's also a scheme for evaluating the assignment. Because this assignment is somewhat shorter than the longer assignment, the second and the last assignment, I'm not going to use that evaluation scheme as strictly. You will see that some of the categories in that is not really applicable, and therefore I will keep that in mind, but I will not strictly use it. I will give more of an overview, or more of a mark of an impression, and to see if it's correct, to see if you treat it with insight, and to see if you have weighed your words well, to put it in that way. Secondly, if you really want to have a guide concerning words, I thought to keep it wide if you want to. Not less than 500, I would think, but not more than 2,500. So between 500 and 2,500. But as I said, it's not really about counting the words. It's more about weighing them and being precise in what you are saying. So hopefully that's enough on the first assignment. I just want to check here on my own computer on Ifundi. yeah, it says here the assignment is due on the 19th of March. And yes, there hasn't been any submissions yet, but you've still got ample time to do that. If you have any questions, please send them via Efundi. As I said, then it's always easier just to keep track of the correspondence. Okay, it seems as if there's no submissions. Okay, then continuing, you will remember that previously I just give you the map, just to give you an idea of the area that we are working in. The map is of the Holy Roman Empire. 1512 is the date given, and that is just before the start of the Reformation, because during the Reformation there were a lot of changes, and therefore you always have to keep the date in mind, but at least this will give you some indication of where we were. If I can just quickly, Saxony, where Luther started, Austria, which was an ally of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, and currently we will be looking at more or less this area. The Swiss Confederation, I will just now show you another map with more detail of that, and this is where Savoy is, and later on the Dukes of Savoy had especially an influence here. This is where France is, and the French always had a large influence in Switzerland, as well as the Italians from here. Rome is not indicated there, but Rome is just to the south of Italy. And perhaps it's unnecessary to say that, but just keep in mind that this is a very, very, very mountainous area. Actually, you could say the Alps more or less goes like that. That's a very, very rough sketch of the Alps. If we continue then, if you just go back for a moment, the southern part, this is the map we're going to look at now in more detail. This is more or less the Swiss Confederation. You can take note of the date, put it in red, 1515 more or less. And the most important places here, you would see, here is Zurich, where Zwingli started his work. This is Bern. Even today, Bern is the capital of Switzerland. But these were all somewhat fairly independent states, or cantons, forming in an alliance, forming Switzerland. Just for interest's sake, Geneva is, I think that's more or less where Geneva is. I hope I'm correct now. But in any case, and you will see that it's always helpful if you read all these names, just to try to find, at least to place yourself, because it's more easily to understand what happens if you know at least where what is happening. This is where Basel is. You could say Germany more or less that way, Italy to the south, Austria, I think it might even be indicated here, not so much, I don't see that. Austria more or less this way, France more or less that way, this way as well, perhaps. And a city like Strasbourg, I think, would be more or less there, just to give you an indication of where we are, the area that we look at. This is Glerius, or Glerus, which we also will discuss when we look at Zwingli. St. Gallen, and it becomes clear why Zwingli were eventually very much concerned with these cantons as well. I think we can continue with this unless there's any questions. I will put this for you on Ifundi as well. Then I would just like to ask, any questions about today's reading, any difficult terminology, any specific concepts you want to discuss? So I'll just give a few moments for someone to ask a question.
Professor, it's ASM here.
Good morning.
Just a general question regarding the reading. And the question is that would Zwingli's Reformation have happened irrespective if Luther's Reformation might have happened or not? So yeah, basically I think would the Zwingli's Reformation have had to extend even without Luther?
I think I hope everyone could hear the question. The question is if Zwingli would have had his Reformation, especially to the extent that it happened without Luther. I think this is a question that calls for speculation, but I think it's very interesting. I think, in a sense, you could say not to the same extent as it would have happened. I think for two reasons, perhaps three reasons. I think Luther provided vital insight into the gospel. And without Luther's insight into the gospel, I do not know whether Zwingli and his fellow humanists who studied the Bible, but in a sense in a biblicistic way, without really realizing the gospel in there, without Luther's contribution, I don't think Zwingli would have gained the insight that he eventually gained. I think that's one of the things that you have to keep in mind. Secondly, because of Luther's the whole reformational process and the opposition against the Roman Catholic Church, against the emperor, and the developments, the political developments along with that, created, in a sense, a political safety, a safety net for the Reformation to develop. To my mind, if it had not been for the German Reformation, Charles V would probably have had much more authority and support from the Roman Catholic, because remember that all of Switzerland were officially a Roman Catholic, who would have had much more of a free hand in suppressing the Reformation in Switzerland violently. But because he needed the support of the Protestants in Germany, I think his attention was divided. I don't think that I think if it weren't for the German Reformation, I think he could have crushed the Reformation in Switzerland as well. I think those are the two most important factors that you have to keep in mind when answering such a question. But it's very difficult to say because you have to speculate. If you take a step back in a sense and remember that history is not merely made by people, but life is under the guidance of Christ who rules who rules creation. To put it carefully, Christ might have decided on another way to bring about the Reformation. But as I said in the beginning, that's actually speculating. So it's very difficult to really say what would have happened if it had not been for the German Reformation. I don't know if you want to add any thoughts. You just put out the question. I think it's an interesting question, but you're welcome to discuss the matter.
Thank you, Professor. Yes, we agree with you in this, that probably it is that Zwingli would have probably remained within the humanistic sphere if it wasn't for Luther's contribution. But I guess the question arises out of the concern that that because of Zwingli's own reformatory understanding, when he started to read the Lord's Prayer and also his encounter with the bubonic plague, would perhaps it been regarding the sovereign plan of God that Zwingli have independently gotten to the point of completely breaking free of the Catholic Church, regardless of Luther, and we also in a sense speculate about this.
Yeah, I think we can keep in mind that throughout the ages, many people were in the same situation as Zwingli was, severely ill, in a life-threatening situation, especially if you're under the impression that you have to contribute in some way with good works to the offering of Christ. I think many people were in that situation and thought of how to get out of it. But to put it in this way, Luther put another option on the table that weren't really considered by those people. And by putting the option on the table of being saved by faith and grace alone, it gave a way out for Zwingli that I think you would not have realized that he had it not been for Luther's contribution. But yes, I agree with you.
Professor, what level of influence did Thomas Weitenbach had on Zwingli's idea that you are saved by faith alone, as opposed to Luther's influence on Zwingli?
I also read the statement, but I cannot really answer that question. I do not have enough information to answer that question. What I would think is that perhaps we should. Can you just go back to the date? Does the reading give a date to when that happened? Why I'm asking the question, if I remember correctly, that was after 1920, perhaps. Oh, 1920, 1520. And it might be that Weitenbach also got that from Luther, but I'm not sure. That's just a a thought I'm having that it wasn't his original thought as well. I think also, yes?
Oh, no, sorry, Professor. I just want to say that I think that, to my understanding, Weitenbach was one of Zwingli's lecturers
Yes.
in Vienna, I believe.
Yes.
So our assumption is that it happened before he was exposed to Luther.
Yeah, if I agree with you, and maybe it was even before he went to the parish in Glarus, which I think started about 1516, not so? If that was the case, then he was definitely not influenced by Luther, because Luther only had the insight 1517, 1518. I would, if possible, I will try to get a better answer to you on that one, but I cannot really answer the question.
Thank you, Professor.
Any other questions from anybody else, perhaps, on today's reading?
Good morning, Professor.
Good morning. Who's speaking?
That's Zeni Harmse from ASM.
You're welcome to speak Afrikaans too if you want to.
Okay, no, this question is in English.
Fine.
I just want to know what it means by to be baptized by effusion. I think in Walker, with the Anabaptists, they say that about 35 of them were baptized by effusion.
If
Explain that one.
If I understand that correctly, it is meant that you are submerged in water. But I will have to look at that just as well. Yes, that you are completely submerged. That it is not merely a bit of water that is used to sprinkle. For instance, a bit of water on your forehead, as usually is done with when you baptize babies. I know that there are usually more or less three ways of baptism. Usually, when you baptize a child or a baby, you would just use a little water on his forehead. There's also some churches, and that is more on the eastern part, that would use, in Afrikaans we speak about begieting. And maybe this is even that you would use a beaker or a vessel, and you would pour out some water, but say a liter or two, pour out some water on someone, or that you can physically immerse him completely. Perhaps some of the other students that know the term better may also help. But I will try to get back to you on this one as well.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay. Any other questions? Let me just make a note of this. It doesn't help. I say I will get back to you, and then I don't get back to you. But I'll remember these two things. Okay. If we then quickly look at, I said this for our next class, study unit 3, assignment 1, the instructions on Infundi. I've spoken about the due date. I just wanted to cover that, and then there must be a, yes, okay. This is more or less just an overview of the most important events in Zwingli's life, just to help you to get a sense of when what happened. Was born in Valdus, if I remember correctly, 1884, meaning that he was just a few months older than Luther. this seems not to be correct. If I'm speaking about this, the second. I wonder if these dates are correct. But in any case, what is important, yes, that can be. It was there until 1616. Accompanied the Swiss mercenaries when fighting for the Pope as a chaplain. And this is one of the things that I think differs when we look at Zwingli's approach to Luther's approach. I think I can use this opportunity just to explain. Previously I said that you could, if you have to explain the difference between the Roman Catholic and the Lutheran view on the relationship between church and state, between holy and profane, between holy and normal, you would say that the Roman Catholic scheme would more or less look like this, and this is the holy and this is the secular or the profane. Luther moved that to have a sense of two kingdoms, where you have a spiritual and a physical kingdom. But he was always very careful, although these two would work in combination, always very careful to that they should not get mixed up. When we come to the Anabaptists, you could nearly say that they also had more or less this scheme, but in a sense there was even opposition between the state and the church, and that the state was more or less regarded as a necessary evil, just to be tolerated. But the less the church or a believer had to do with the state, actually the better. So a very negative view towards the church. In Zwingli's case, I think you would also have, you could put the two kingdoms in this sense, but a quite close collaboration between the state and the church. The authors also make the point that in theory, he wanted more of a Lutheran system where they would be separated. But in practice, quite often, the state performed the commands of the church. Therefore, for instance, in 1522, when Zwingli finally broke with the Roman Catholic Church, you could say, when he renounced his, just previously renounced his being a priest, he became a preacher for the council, which is in a sense, how can a council have a preacher? And he did not have any problems with that. So, and I think it is because, partly because Zwingli had a much closer relationship between church and state than Luther, that the Anabaptists reacted towards that and said that he did not really, he wasn't a true reformer, but that he only went halfway. He should have rejected the relationship with the church at all, because the Anabaptists were the first people really to promote a complete separation between church and state. Which quite a lot of countries today follow. Both of these schemes, and even that one, led to the religious wars, which were only ended in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, which was also the end of the 30 Years' War. And that actually brought about a division between church and state to a large extent, to say that we're not going to have the state influence the church as much in the Protestant countries. In the Roman Catholic countries, the Pope always used to have a large influence on state matters as well. But that is why, because Zwingli had this close cooperation between church and state, he had no problem being a chaplain and going with the soldiers when they went on their excursions. And eventually he died at Koppel in battle. It is very gruesome today if we see what was done with his body afterwards. But died in battle, and as far as I know, it's the only reformer that has died in such a way and had such an active participation in war. Even just before the war, when after 1525, and especially after in 1528, when Bern formally became a reformed province or a reformed region, Zwingli, the council, only wanted to enforce the Reformation in some of the Swiss cantons, and they wanted to do that by the way of sanctions and prohibiting food from getting there and forcing them in that way, and that was not enough for Zwingli, and he wanted to wage a war, but eventually wasn't prepared for that war, and died at the Battle of Koppel. So when looking at Zwingli, even though he understood that one is saved by grace, he still had a very close relationship with the government, whereas the Anabaptists would actually try to have as little as possible to do with the worldly government. You can take note that Zwingli became, after he left Glorious, because of the French making the world difficult for him, went to Great Münster in Zurich, and that's where he actually became well known and began to influence matters. At that stage, you could really call him still more or less a humanist reformer. Keep in mind that Holland discussed the difference between when he was speaking about Luther, a reformer with I don't know what to put it that way, a reformer with a small r, and a reformer with a capital R. And this is Holland's way of putting it when Luther really discovered the gospel. But to a large extent, Zwingli only started out as a reformer, saying that there are things within the Catholic Church that is not right and should be set right, but more or less with the program of Erasmus, not really understanding the gospel itself. In 1520, you could say that is the turning point for Zwingli. Started to debate with Cardinal Scheiner, and one of the things you should keep in mind is that such a public debate was one of the customs in those days to settle matters. There would be the parties who would debate, there would be a panel who would judge the debate, and eventually the outcome of the debate would determine the policy on that matter. And therefore, these debates were much more important than just people coming and discussing a matter. When it was discussed and it was eventually decided, that became policy. I think, 1523. If you look at the changes that was brought about because of that debate by the City Council of Zurich, this FBR is an abbreviation for Faber. If you go back to Gregory the Great, Pope Gregory the Great, in 590, so it's about 1,000 years back. His theology dominated much of the Roman Catholic religion for the Middle Ages. And if you go back to the changes that the dispute of 1523 was brought about, much of those changes were changing what Gregory said. You could see it was a rather, on a religious point of view, a rather radical break with the theology of the Roman Catholic Church. And because of the nature of the view of church and state being so closely linked together, the moment that the church, in a sense, changed, it influenced the state and therefore brought the state in opposition to the Roman Catholic orientated states. One of the things that you should always keep in mind when you look at this area is the whole concept of freedom of religion that we are accustomed to today did not really exist in these times. The Anabaptists tried to tell people, just leave us alone, but there was the faith that public order is only guaranteed when there is one state and one faith. You cannot have one state with more than one faith. I'm careful to draw a comparison, but in a sense, some of the more conservative, if that's the correct word, Muslim countries today, who do not allow any other religions and who will persecute anyone who doesn't belong to the Islam faith, it's more or less the same situation as that. Yes, when we come to Calvin, we will look at this again. One of the things that you should also keep in mind that there was also a second dispute, but at that stage, the council started to move much more slowly than Zwingli wanted to move for changing the religion itself. I see that we have about 4 minutes left. We haven't really looked at the Anabaptists themselves. Something, yes, but not really. Are there any questions about the Anabaptists or on Zwingli before we close? Or any other questions about the work?
Professor, just regarding why do you think was the Anabaptist movement so successful in propagating its faith regarding the culture of Europe at that time?
To my mind, I think, and this is my opinion, I might be one-sided completely, but the Roman Catholic Church's trust in the sacraments, as if the church had the power to give salvation through the sacraments. That compared with the general life of many of the clergy, that there were, in a sense, two sets of rules, that you had to do this, but they did not live up to their own standards. I think indicated to a lot of people that everything is not right as it seems. Although the people weren't as educated, in the sense that it wasn't the case that everyone was able to read and things like that. I think a lot of people realize that something is wrong. And that is why I think the Anabaptists realize that you cannot baptize everyone and disregard the fact that one needs to be in Christ to be saved. Now, the whole question of baptism, whether you should baptize, should baptize someone as an infant,